They laughed when I presented my $1,700 proposal, called me the PowerPoint teacher, scrutinized every budget line like it was a yard sale listing. 3 months later, I presented that exact same proposal, but this time at an investor conference. The final deal brought in $37 million, and the person sitting in the front row, one of them, not knowing whether to applaud or bow their head in apology. My name is Lauren Pierce, and at 38, I'd spent 12 years climbing the corporate ladder at Nova Forge, a mid-sized tech company in Raleigh, North Carolina. I wasn't the type to make waves or demand recognition. I was the one who stayed late analyzing user behavior patterns, who could spot a market trend before it became obvious, who turned data into strategy while others turned meetings into theater. The morning everything changed started like any other. I arrived at the office at 7:45 a.m., coffee in hand, laptop bag slung over my shoulder. The familiar hum of servers in our open floor plan greeted me as I settled into my desk, preparing for the 10 a.m. product strategy meeting where I'd present my latest proposal. I'd spent 3 weeks crafting a comprehensive integration of AI-driven user behavior analysis into our flagship product. Nothing revolutionary in concept, but the execution was precise. I'd identified patterns in our user data that others had missed, micro-interactions that revealed intent before action. The beauty was in its simplicity: $1,700 for a minimum viable product test. That's all I needed to prove the concept could increase user retention by 32%. The conference room filled slowly. Eli Carrington strutted in at 9:58 a.m., designer sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. He'd been promoted to head of product innovation just 2 months prior, despite having half my experience and none of my track record. But he had something I didn't: the ability to make mediocre ideas sound revolutionary, and the CEO's ear during their weekend golf games. "All right, let's see what we've got today," Eli announced, dropping into his chair with practiced casualness. His team 3 junior product managers who laughed at his jokes and nodded at his observations flanked him like courtiers. I began my presentation, walking through the slides with measured confidence: user behavior patterns, predictive analytics, implementation timeline, ROI projections, each point backed by data, each assumption tested against our existing metrics. 10 minutes in, I saw the first smirk. One of Eli's disciples nudged another, whispering something behind a cupped hand. Eli himself leaned back, arms crossed, the corner of his mouth twitching with barely suppressed amusement. "So let me get this straight," he interrupted as I reached the budget slide. "You want $1,700 to play with AI because you think you found some magical pattern in how people click buttons?" "It's more sophisticated than that," I replied, keeping my voice level. The analysis shows that someone's been spending too much time in Excel," he cut in, earning chuckles from his crew. "This is like, what do they call it, when housewives who used to study sociology try to apply their college theories to the real world." The room temperature seemed to drop. Other attendees shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Eli and me. "Look, Lauren," he continued, adopting a patronizing tone, "I appreciate the effort, really. All these slides, all these charts, very thorough, very academic. But this isn't a university research project. This is a tech company. We need bold moves, not $1,700 science experiments. The data supports whatever story you want to tell." Eli waved dismissively. "That's the thing about you PowerPoint teachers. You think if you make enough slides, format enough cells, the world will bend to your spreadsheets. But innovation, real innovation, that takes vision, not formulas." His followers nodded sagely, as if he'd just delivered profound wisdom instead of empty rhetoric. I stood there, proposal remote in hand, watching my 3 weeks of work get reduced to a punchline. Sarah from marketing cleared her throat. "Maybe we should look at the projections." "We've seen enough," Eli declared. "This is exactly the kind of small thinking that's been holding us back. $1,700. Why not ask for 17 cents? At least then we'd save money on the paper you printed this on." More laughter, forced, Uncomfortable, but laughter nonetheless. The kind that happens when people know they're watching someone get humiliated but don't want to be next. I closed my laptop with a soft click. I see. Well, thank you for your feedback. Don't take it personally, Eli added with mock sympathy. Not everyone's cut out for product innovation. Maybe focus on what you're good at: documentation, process flows, that sort of thing. Leave the big ideas to people who understand the market. I gathered my materials methodically, refusing to rush, refusing to let them see anything but calm professionalism. As I reached the door, Eli delivered his final blow. Oh, and Lauren, next time you want to present something, maybe run it by someone first. Save us all the time. The walk back to my desk felt endless. I could feel eyes on me, some sympathetic, most simply glad it wasn't them. I sat down, opened my laptop, and stared at the proposal that had just been torn apart. Not because it was wrong. Eli hadn't challenged a single number or questioned the methodology. He'd simply decided it was beneath consideration because it came from me. But as I looked at those slides, those carefully crafted projections, those user behavior patterns that I knew with absolute certainty would transform how we understood our customers, something cold and clear crystallized in my mind. They could laugh, they could mock, they could call me whatever they wanted. The data didn't lie, and neither would I. The systematic erasure of my presence began the following Monday. My keycard suddenly stopped working for the executive conference room. System glitch, security said. But Eli's team waltzed in without issue. The product strategy meetings moved from 10 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. coincidentally, the exact time I had my standing weekly call with our European partners, a commitment everyone knew I couldn't reschedule. You should be more flexible, Eli mentioned casually as he passed my desk one morning, ceramic mug in hand. Adaptability is key in innovation. By the third week, I'd been removed from the product development Slack channels. My access to user analytics data I'd been analyzing for 5 years got revoked pending a security audit. Instead, they assigned me to update documentation for legacy features, the kind of mind-numbing work given to interns and people they wanted to push out. The Tuesday afternoon when I was called into HR, I'd already seen it coming. Monica from Human Resources sat across from me, her smile as artificial as the succulent on her desk. Lauren, we've had some concerns raised about your collaborative approach, she began, folding her hands with practiced concern. Several team members feel you've been resistant to new leadership directions. Resistant, I repeated flatly. Eli mentioned you've been difficult in meetings, combative, even. I presented one proposal once. Monica's smile tightened. It's not about the frequency, it's about the attitude. We need team players here at Nova Forge, people who understand that innovation requires a certain enthusiasm for collective vision. I almost laughed. Collective vision, corporate speak for shut up and fall in line. I have 18 successful product launches under my belt, I said quietly. My user retention strategies have saved this company $2.3 million in the last year alone. We appreciate your past contributions, Monica replied, the dismissal clear in her tone. But the company is evolving. We need to ensure everyone is aligned with our new direction. Perhaps you should take some time to reflect on whether your working style matches our current culture. The message was clear: conform or leave. But they wanted me to quit. If they fired me, they'd have to pay severance, deal with potential legal issues. If I left on my own, I'd just be another statistic, another woman who couldn't handle the pressure of tech innovation. Thursday brought the final insult. Derek, a 23-year-old fresh from his coding boot camp, appeared at my desk with an eager smile. Hi, Lauren, I'm Derek. Eli assigned me to handle the user behavior analytics you used to manage. He said you could show me the ropes before you transition to your new role. My new role? Oh, his face flushed. I thought you knew. You're moving to technical documentation full-time. Eli said your attention to detail would be perfect for it. Technical documentation. After 12 years of strategic product development, they wanted me to write user manuals. I smiled at Derek. Of course, let me show you the system. I spent 2 hours training him, watching him struggle with concepts I could navigate blindfolded. But I was patient, thorough. I even created a detailed guide for him on my personal laptop, using my personal email. Every piece of institutional knowledge I'd accumulated, documented and transferred, clean, professional, untouchable. That night, I stayed late, not to work on the documentation they'd assigned me, but to review every contract, every agreement I'd signed with Nova Forge. I photographed pages with my phone, highlighted clauses, cross-referenced with state employment law. And there it was, buried in subsection 3.2.4 of the Intellectual Property Agreement. Ideas, concepts, or proposals formally rejected by the company without material financial investment shall not be considered company property, provided the employee can demonstrate independent creation prior to formal submission. They'd rejected my proposal, publicly, humiliatingly, without spending a dime on it. It was 11:45 p.m. when I finally packed up. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew and the ever-present hum of servers. I stood in the middle of the open floor plan, looking at the desks of people who'd avoided eye contact for weeks, at the conference room where I'd been laughed at Eli's corner office with its ridiculous standing desk and motivational posters. They thought they were pushing out a documentation drone, a PowerPoint teacher who'd gotten too comfortable, too set in her ways to embrace their bold new vision. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. $1,700. That's all I'd asked for. The price of Eli's monthly coffee budget, probably. But they couldn't see past their own arrogance to recognize what I'd found in those behavior patterns. Those tiny digital breadcrumbs that revealed not just what users did, but what they wanted to do next. The next morning, I submitted my resignation, 2 weeks' notice, as professional as everything else I'd done. No complaints, no accusations, no bridges burned in writing. Monica seemed relieved. Eli didn't even bother to respond to the email. "It's probably for the best," Sarah from marketing whispered when she heard. "You know how it is. Sometimes the culture just shifts." I nodded, smiled, played the part of the gracefully defeated middle manager who'd recognized her time had passed. Inside, I was already 3 moves ahead, my mind racing through incorporation documents, pitch decks, and the names of every talented developer Nova Forge had foolishly let go in their last restructuring. They wanted me gone. Fine, but they'd forgotten the first rule of user behavior analysis: past actions predict future outcomes. And my future had nothing to do with technical documentation. My last night at Nova Forge arrived with the quiet dignity of a funeral nobody wanted to attend. The office had emptied by 6 p.m., leaving me alone with the ghosts of 12 years' worth of late nights and early mornings. I told everyone I was finishing up documentation transfers. The truth was more surgical. I inserted my personal external drive, the encrypted one I'd used for years to back up my work, a practice I'd started long before Eli's reign of mediocrity. Every mock-up, every wireframe, every A/B test result from my rejected proposal began its journey home. These weren't company property anymore. They'd made sure of that when they laughed me out of the conference room. The timestamps were critical. I photographed each file's properties, showing creation dates weeks before that humiliating meeting, my personal Google Drive account, my personal Adobe subscription, my personal analytics tools. I'd built this proposal like a carpenter working in their garage after hours, using their own tools, their own wood, their own vision. At 9:15 p.m., I pulled up the original email threads, the ones where I'd first floated the concept to my mentor at Stanford, where I'd sketched the algorithm on my iPad during a weekend trip to Asheville. Digital breadcrumbs proving this idea was born outside Nova Forge's walls, brought to them as an offering they'd spat on. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd assigned Derek to take over user analytics, but in their haste to diminish me, they'd forgotten to revoke my access to the testing environments. I could have sabotaged everything, left logic bombs in the code, corrupted the databases, but that would have been petty, unprofessional, traceable. Instead, I documented everything, every test I'd run, every pattern I'd discovered, every insight that had led to that $1,700 proposal. I created comprehensive guides for Derek Honest ones, helpful ones. I wanted Nova Forge to succeed with their existing products. I just wouldn't let them have what they'd rejected. At 11:20 p.m., I started my final task. I opened a new document, not on the company laptop, but on my phone, typing carefully with my thumbs. Intellectual Property Certification I, Lauren Pierce, certify that the behavioral analysis algorithm and associated implementation strategies presented to Nova Forge leadership on date were developed independently using personal resources, personal time, and personal tools. The formal rejection of this proposal by Eli Carrington and the product team, documented in meeting minutes and witnessed by 8 employees, constitutes a clear relinquishment of any claim to this intellectual property under Section 3.2.4 of my employment agreement. I emailed it to myself, to my lawyer, and to a time-stamped blockchain certification service. Maybe overkill, but I'd learned that in corporate warfare, there's no such thing as too much ammunition. The cleaning crew arrived at 11:45 p.m. Maria, who'd been vacuuming these floors for longer than I'd been analyzing user data, paused at my desk. "Working late again, Miss Lauren." "Last time," I said, unplugging my laptop and sliding it into my bag. "They letting you go?" Her English was accented, but her perception was sharp. "Something like that." She shook her head. "They don't know what they lose. You always say hello. Always remember my name. That Mr. Eli. He looked through me like I'm furniture." I smiled, genuine for the first time in weeks. "Take care, Maria." "You too, Miss Lauren, you too." I packed my personal items methodically. The cactus I'd nursed for 5 years, the coffee mug from our first successful product launch, framed photos of team celebrations from when we actually celebrated each other's successes instead of stabbing backs. Each item went into a box I'd brought from home. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me carry out my career in a paper ream box like some movie cliché. My desk drawer yielded its final treasure, a USB drive labeled User Behavior Analysis V1.0, Personal Project. I'd kept it here as insurance, never thinking I'd need it. Now it felt like destiny in molded plastic. I stood up, surveying the clean desk. Tomorrow, Derek would sit here, fumbling with passwords and permissions, trying to understand systems I'd built from scratch. He'd probably last 6 months before Eli found another scapegoat for his next failed initiative. The walk to the elevator felt ceremonial. Each step echoed in the empty office, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of something they couldn't imagine. The security camera watched me go, its red light blinking like a digital heartbeat. I wondered if anyone would ever review this footage, see me leaving with my box of memories and drive full of futures. In the parking garage, I loaded everything into my car carefully. The box went in the back seat. The USB drive went into my purse, zipped into the inner pocket where I kept my passport and emergency cash. Some things were too valuable for casual storage. I sat in my car for a moment, engine off, looking up at the Nova Forge building. Somewhere up there, my desk was now empty, my projects reassigned, my contributions already being erased from institutional memory. By Monday, it would be like I'd never existed, just another casualty of Eli's innovation revolution. But in my purse sat proof that I had existed. More than that, proof that I'd created something they couldn't see, couldn't understand, and now couldn't have. I started the engine and pulled out of my assigned parking spot for the last time. No dramatic squealing of tires, no middle finger to the building, just a quiet departure, like a ghost fading at dawn. They thought they'd won, thought they'd pushed out another middle-aged woman who couldn't adapt to their boys' club culture. Tomorrow they'd high-five over craft beer and congratulate themselves on trimming the fat. Let them celebrate. While they were popping bottles, I'd be building empires from the ashes of their arrogance. The highway stretched before me, dark and full of possibility. I had $1,700 in my savings account, exactly what I'd asked them for. Somehow, that felt like poetic justice. It was 12:23 a.m. when I finally pulled into my garage. Day one of my new life would begin in less than 6 hours. I could hardly wait. 3 weeks later, I stood in the lobby of the Austin Convention Center, name badge reading Lauren Pierce, founder and CEO, NeuroBlink. The transformation felt surreal from corporate exile to startup founder in 21 days, but the data had always been clear. I just needed the right audience. The startup conference buzzed with hungry energy. Young founders pitched impossible dreams to venture capitalists who'd heard it all before. The air smelled of ambition and overpriced coffee. I'd registered late, paid the vendor fee with my credit card, and claimed a small demo station between a meal kit blockchain startup and an app that promised to revolutionize dog walking. I didn't need a prime location. I needed the right eyes on my screen. At 2:30 p.m., I spotted my target, Patricia Yang, managing partner at Apex Ventures, known for her brutal honesty and her track record of backing data-driven startups. She moved through the crowd like a shark, cutting past the desperate pitches and flashy displays. I didn't chase her. Instead, I pulled up my demonstration, the same behavioral analysis system Nova Forge had mocked, now running live on a sample dataset. The patterns flowed across my monitor like digital poetry, showing not just what users did, but predicting what they'd do next with 87% accuracy. She noticed the screen first, then me. "That's interesting. What am I looking at?" "The difference between guessing what your users want and knowing it," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my racing pulse. Patricia stepped closer. I walked her through the algorithm, the implementation, the test results I'd gathered using public datasets and volunteer beta users I'd recruited from university contacts. No proprietary Nova Forge data. I was too smart for that trap. This was clean, original, mine. Cost to implement: $1,700 for initial integration, full deployment scales based on user volume. She actually smiled. "That's oddly specific." "I believe in precision. Show me the code." For the next 40 minutes, I dissected my creation for one of the sharpest minds in venture capital. She questioned every assumption, challenged every projection, probed for weaknesses like a surgeon looking for cancer. I had answers for everything because I'd lived with this data for months, dreamed in its patterns, built my future on its foundation. "You built this alone." "The concept and core algorithm. Yes, I've since brought on 2 developers, former Nova Forge employees, laid off in the last round of restructuring. Brilliant minds wasted by Eli's ignorance. They joined me for equity and the chance to build something that mattered." Patricia pulled out her phone. "I'm texting my team. Can you present to our full partnership Monday at 9 a.m.? My heart hammered, but my voice stayed level. "I'll be there." The rest of the conference blurred past. Other VCs stopped by, drawn by Patricia's interest. I collected business cards, scheduled follow-ups, but my mind was already in that Monday meeting room, facing the partnership that could transform my $1,700 idea into reality. Sunday night, I refined my presentation one last time. Not PowerPoint. I was done being the PowerPoint teacher. Instead, I'd built an interactive demonstration, letting the data tell its own story. Clean, elegant, undeniable. The Apex Ventures office occupied the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Austin. Monday morning arrived crisp and bright. I wore my best suit, the one I'd bought for a Nova Forge executive presentation I'd never been allowed to give. 8:45 a.m. I sat in their waiting area, watching the city wake up below. My phone buzzed a text from one of my developers. "You've got this. We believe in you." 9 a.m. sharp. Patricia led me into a conference room where 5 other partners waited. I recognized them from TechCrunch articles and Twitter threads, the people who decided which dreams lived and which died. 15 minutes, Patricia said. "Show us why user behavior analysis matters." I didn't talk about my background, didn't mention Nova Forge or Eli, or the humiliation that had birthed this moment. I let the technology speak. Live demonstration, real data, predictive models updating in real time as I manipulated variables. I showed them how my algorithm could predict user churn 3 weeks before it happened. Identify upsell opportunities with uncanny accuracy. Transform raw clicks into actionable intelligence. Questions. They had many, hard ones, technical ones, business model challenges and scaling concerns and competitive analysis. I fielded them all, drawing on 12 years of experience they didn't know I had, insights forged in the fires of corporate rejection. Initial funding request. This from David Park, the senior partner who'd backed 3 unicorns. $2 million seed round. That gives us 18 months of runway, 3 key hires, and enough data to prove the model at scale. They exchanged glances. Patricia nodded almost imperceptibly. "We'll need to do due diligence," David said. "But I think we're interested, very interested." I managed to walk calmly to the elevator, made it to my car with professional dignity intact. Then I sat in the parking garage and shook for 5 minutes straight, adrenaline finally overwhelming control. 2 days later, Patricia called. "We're in, $2 million at a $12 million pre-money valuation. Welcome to the Apex portfolio." I stared at my laptop screen, at the same algorithm Eli had laughed at, now valued at $14 million post-money. My stake worth $8.4 million on paper, with $2 million in cash to build my vision. "Lauren, you there?" "Yes," I managed. "I'm here." "Good, because this is just the beginning. We see what you've built. More importantly, we see what it could become, that behavioral analysis system. It's not just a feature, it's a platform, maybe the platform." After the call, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a printed screenshot the email thread where Eli had formally rejected my proposal, where he'd called it small thinking and academic nonsense. I'd kept it as fuel, as reminder, as prophecy. Now it was just history. His ignorance had set me free. That night, I updated my LinkedIn. Founder and CEO at Neuroblink, building the future of user intelligence. Within hours, connection requests poured in. Former colleagues, industry contacts, and their 3 requests from NovaForge employees. I accepted them all, even Derek, who'd inherited my old desk and my old problems, especially Derek. Let them watch what happened next. The chess pieces moved slowly at first. For 6 months, I kept Neuroblink in stealth mode, building our technology, filing patents, and establishing relationships with key enterprise clients. We operated from a small office in Austin, just 5 of us working 18-hour days to perfect what NovaForge had dismissed as worthless. Then Zentria called. Margaret Liu, their chief technology officer, reached out on a Tuesday afternoon in October. "We've been tracking your work," she said without preamble. "Our e-commerce platform needs predictive analytics, real prediction, not the garbage most vendors peddle. Patricia Yang says you're the real deal." Zentria, the same $40 billion e-commerce giant NovaForge had been courting for 2 years, the whale every B2B software company dreamed of landing. "I'd be happy to discuss our capabilities," I replied, already knowing where this would lead. The meeting was set for the following week. I flew to Seattle, demonstrated Neuroblink's platform to their technical team, and watched their eyes widen as our algorithm predicted customer behavior patterns they'd been trying to decode for years. "How long for full integration?" Margaret asked. 3 months for initial deployment, 6 months for complete platform integration. "And you can guarantee these accuracy rates?" "We'll put it in the contract. 87% predictive accuracy or you pay nothing." She smiled. "That's bold." "It's not bold when you know it works." 2 weeks of negotiations followed. Their legal team scrutinized every clause, while their technical team ran proof-of-concept tests. Neuroblink passed every challenge, exceeded every benchmark. Meanwhile, back in Raleigh, NovaForge was preparing their own pitch to Zentria. I knew because Derek Poor, overwhelmed Derek had started messaging me on LinkedIn, asking hypothetical questions about user behavior analysis. He was drowning in systems he didn't understand, trying to build something resembling intelligence from the scraps I'd left behind. "They want me to create predictive models," he wrote one night at 11:45 p.m. "Eli says it should be easy since you did it. but I can't find any of your algorithm documentation." Of course he couldn't. That algorithm was currently running live demos for Zentria's board of directors. The collision came in early November. Zentria scheduled final vendor presentations for their new analytics platform. 3 companies made the shortlist: Oracle, Nova Forge, and a small startup called Neuroblink. I heard about Nova Forge's inclusion from Sarah in marketing, who'd remained a friendly contact. Eli's been bragging about it for weeks. She messaged me. Says they've got game-changing behavioral analytics. Isn't that what you proposed? Something like that, I replied. The presentation day arrived gray and drizzling in Seattle. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., an hour before our scheduled slot. Oracle went first, then Nova Forge. I sat in the waiting area, watching Eli stride past with his team, designer sneakers clicking on marble floors. He didn't recognize me at first. I'd traded my corporate blazers for a sleek black suit, my apologetic smile for quiet confidence. When he did spot me, his face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, and then something approaching panic. "Lauren, what are you doing here?" "Presenting to Zentria, you." We're pitching our new behavioral analytics platform." He tried to recover his swagger. "Major enterprise deal, game-changing technology." "Behavioral analytics." I kept my voice mild. "That's interesting. I thought that was PowerPoint teacher territory." His face flushed. "Look, that was just business is business, no hard feelings." "None at all," I said, and meant it. Feelings were irrelevant. Data was everything. Nova Forge presented at 9 a.m. Through the glass conference room walls, I could see Eli gesturing enthusiastically, his team nodding along. They'd built something, clearly, some Frankenstein's monster of half-understood concepts and borrowed ideas, held together by Derek's desperate late-night coding sessions. At 10 a.m., my turn arrived. I entered the room to find Zentria's evaluation committee of 12, including Margaret Liu and their CEO, Robert Zhao, and there, at the far end of the table, sat Eli and 2 of his team members. Standard practice letting vendors observe each other's presentations to ensure transparency. His face when he saw me enter as CEO of Neuroblink was worth every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every humiliation I'd endured. "Good morning," I began, pulling up my demonstration. "I'm Lauren Pierce, CEO of Neuroblink. Today, I'm going to show you the future of user behavior prediction." What followed was 45 minutes of controlled devastation. Every feature Nova Forge had stumbled through, I demonstrated with elegant precision. Every promise they'd made, I exceeded with live data. But the killing blow came when Robert Zhao asked about implementation costs. "Our complete platform integration comes to $37 million over 5 years, I said. "That includes licensing, support, and guaranteed accuracy rates that increase as the system learns." Nova Forge quoted $40 million, someone noted. "I'm sure they did," I replied. "But you're not just evaluating cost, you're evaluating capability. Let me show you something." I pulled up a side-by-side comparison our algorithm's predictions versus actual user behavior from Zentria's test data, 89.3% accuracy. Then I showed them what I'd built in my spare time, a projection of how that accuracy would improve over time, reaching 94% within 18 months. "How?" Margaret asked. "Because this isn't adapted technology or retrofitted features. This is purpose-built behavioral intelligence, designed from the ground up to solve exactly the problems you're facing." In the corner of my vision, I saw Eli slump in his chair. He knew, in that moment, watching undeniable proof of what he'd mocked and dismissed, he understood the magnitude of his mistake. "Can you deliver in Q1?" Robert Zhao asked. "We can start integration by December 1st. The committee exchanged glances. Margaret Liu smiled. "I think we've seen enough. Thank you, Ms. Pierce. We'll be in touch." I gathered my materials with the same methodical calm I'd shown that last night at Nova Forge. As I passed Eli's chair, I paused. $1,700, I said quietly. Just for him. That's all I asked for. Then I left, heels clicking on the same marble that had announced his arrival 2 hours earlier. Behind me, I heard Margaret Liu's voice. I don't think we need to deliberate long on this one. 3 days later, Zentria's contracts arrived. $37 million over 5 years, with performance bonuses that could push it to $45 million. Eli was right about one thing: I was never cut out for small thinking. I just needed the right audience to appreciate how big my thoughts could be. The email arrived at 8:47 a.m. on a Wednesday, 3 days after Zentria's announcement. Nova Forge's legal department, writing with the kind of formal desperation that lawyers perfected when they knew they were on shaky ground. Ms. Pierce, it has come to our attention that NeuroBlink's behavioral analysis platform bears substantial similarity to proprietary work developed during your tenure at Nova Forge. We request immediate clarification regarding the ownership of this intellectual property. I forwarded it to my lawyer with a single word: expected. By noon, we'd crafted our response, professional, courteous, and devastating in its precision. I attached every piece of evidence, the time-stamped proposals showing development before my presentation to Nova Forge, the meeting minutes where Eli formally rejected the concept, the email chains where he'd called it worthless academic exercise, and most damningly, Section 3.2.4 of my employment agreement. As clearly documented, the behavioral analysis algorithm was independently developed using personal resources and formally rejected by Nova Forge leadership without any financial investment. Under the terms of my employment agreement, this rejection constitutes a full relinquishment of any claim to the intellectual property. But I wasn't done. I added one more attachment: Nova Forge's own press release from 6 months ago, where Eli was quoted saying, "We're moving away from incremental improvements and outdated analytical approaches. The future isn't in looking backward at user behavior, it's in bold, forward-thinking innovation." My lawyer added the legal terminology, but the message was clear. You didn't want it then. You can't have it now. The response came faster than expected. 2 hours later, a different email address: Nova Forge's CEO, Marcus Webb, writing personally. Lauren, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we could discuss this situation professionally. I'm confident we can find a mutually beneficial resolution. I read it twice, remembering Marcus from all-hands meetings where he'd preached innovation while letting Eli systematically destroy anyone who actually innovated. He'd been copied on my resignation. He'd signed off on my transition to technical documentation. Now he wanted to chat. Thank you for reaching out, I replied. However, I see no misunderstanding. Nova Forge's position on my proposal was made extremely clear. I've simply pursued the opportunity elsewhere, as was my right. The phone started ringing within minutes. Marcus's assistant, then head of legal, then surprisingly Monica from HR. I let them all go to voicemail, focusing instead on Zentria's integration timeline and my team's deployment schedule. At 2:15 p.m., Patricia Yang called. Getting pressure from your old company. They've expressed some concerns. She laughed. I bet they have. Robert Zhao called me an hour ago. Apparently, Nova Forge tried to convince him they had a competing claim to your technology. He told them to pound sand, but more professionally. And he wants to accelerate the contract, move up the announcement, make it very public that Zentria chose NeuroBlink's innovative approach over legacy vendors. He's annoyed they tried to muddy the waters. I smiled at my laptop screen. I can work with accelerated timelines. I'm sure you can... Oh, and Lauren Zhao mentioned something interesting. Apparently, during Nova Forge's presentation, they kept referencing capabilities they couldn't actually demonstrate, almost like they were describing features they'd seen somewhere but didn't truly understand. Imagine that. By 4 p.m., the legal threats had evolved into desperate bargaining. A new email from Marcus Webb offered to purchase any potential IP conflicts for $5 million. Just sign a simple agreement stating that any work developed during my employment belonged to Nova Forge, regardless of circumstances. $5 million to surrender my creation to the people who'd mocked it, to let Eli take credit for vision he'd lacked, innovation he'd scorned, patterns he couldn't see if they were printed in neon. I drafted my response carefully. Mr. Webb, I appreciate your offer, but must decline. Neuroblink's technology was independently developed and rightfully belongs to our company, as documented in our previous correspondence. Nova Forge explicitly rejected this innovation when presented. That decision, while regrettable for your organization, was final. I wish Nova Forge success in developing its own behavioral analytics capabilities. True innovation, as I learned during my tenure there, requires more than just recognizing good ideas. It requires nurturing them, investing in them, and most importantly, respecting the people who create them. Consider this matter closed. I copied legal, Patricia Yang, and because the data suggested it would maximize impact, Robert Zhao at Zentria. The final email came at 6:23 p.m., not from legal or Marcus or even Eli, from Sarah in marketing, writing from her personal account. Holy shit, Lauren. I just came out of an emergency all hands. Marcus announced a restructuring of product innovation leadership effective immediately. Eli's out. His whole team reassigned. Legal says they need to reassess their IP evaluation process. The best part, Marcus kept talking about the importance of recognizing innovation when it appears, not after it succeeds elsewhere. Pretty sure everyone knew he was talking about you. Drinks to celebrate you buying with that Zentria money. I leaned back in my chair, watching Austin's skyline catch the setting sun. Somewhere in Raleigh, Eli was probably packing his office, loading his motivational posters and designer sneakers into the same kind of box I'd carried out 6 months ago. His team would scatter. His reputation would suffer. His resume would need creative editing to explain this sudden departure. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. His failure was just data, a predictable outcome based on observable patterns. Arrogance plus ignorance equals inevitable collapse. The algorithm of corporate karma, executing exactly as modeled. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Liu. Loved your response to Nova Forge. Very classy, very clear. Looking forward to announcing our partnership Monday. P.S. Zhao wants to know if you'd consider speaking at our Innovation Summit about recognizing transformational ideas. Interested. I typed back. Very interested. I have some thoughts on how organizations can avoid costly mistakes when evaluating innovation. At 7 p.m., I closed my laptop and prepared to leave the office. My team was already gone, heading home to families and lives outside our startup bubble. Tomorrow we'd continue building, growing, proving that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying those who wronged you. It's succeeding so spectacularly that their own mistakes destroy them for you. $1,700. That's all it would have cost them to keep me, to nurture my idea, to share in what we built. Instead, they'd paid millions in lost opportunity, a fortune in damaged reputation, and immeasurable costs in talent they'd never retain again. The math was beautiful in its simplicity, and the data never lied. The implosion at Nova Forge unfolded with the predictable chaos of a company discovering it had thrown away gold while hoarding pyrite. Sarah kept me updated through increasingly frantic messages, painting a picture of corporate panic that would have been satisfying if I'd had time to care. Emergency board meeting at 7 a.m., she wrote on Thursday. Marcus got grilled for 3 hours. They wanted to know how a game-changing innovation walked out the door for the price of a laptop upgrade. I was in back-to-back meetings with Zentria's integration team, but I caught fragments of Nova Forge's meltdown through the industry grapevine. Their stock dipped 4% after Zentria's announcement. Tech blogs picked up the story. E-commerce giant chooses unknown startup over established mamash vendors. The subtext was clear to anyone who could read between lines. Nova Forge had fumbled catastrophically. By Friday, the internal investigation had begun. Derek, overwhelmed and exhausted, finally broke down and admitted he couldn't replicate what I'd built. She created something in 3 weeks that I couldn't reverse engineer in 6 months, he reportedly told the investigators. The documentation she left was helpful for basic operations, but the core algorithm, the actual intelligence that was never in our systems. Monica from HR found herself explaining why a top performer with 12 years of experience had been pushed into documentation work. Eli said she wasn't aligned with our innovation goals. Became the quote that haunted her. Innovation goals. The irony was thick enough to choke on. But the real revelation came from an unexpected source. James Chen from accounting, who'd always kept his head down and his spreadsheets clean, sent an email to the board that someone leaked to TechCrunch. He'd run the numbers if Nova Forge had invested my requested $1,700 and retained ownership of the technology. The Zentria deal alone would have been worth $40 million to their bottom line. Factor in other potential clients, and they'd walked away from a $100 million opportunity. The ROI would have been 2 to 3 on 52,941%, he wrote with an accountant's precision. This represents the single greatest failure of technology assessment in our company's history. Saturday morning brought the final blow. An all-staff email from Marcus Webb, carefully crafted by legal and PR, announcing a comprehensive restructuring of our innovation evaluation process. Eli Carrington would be pursuing opportunities outside the company. His entire team was dissolved, redistributed to departments where they could do less damage. But buried in paragraph 4 was the admission that twisted the knife. We recognize that our previous approach to evaluating innovative proposals may have overlooked valuable opportunities. Going forward, all technical suggestions will be reviewed by a diverse panel of experts to ensure we capture and nurture transformational ideas, regardless of their source. Regardless of their source. Translation, we won't dismiss ideas just because they come from someone we've decided doesn't fit our image of an innovator. Patricia Yang forwarded me the email with a single comment. Beautiful. They're literally rewriting their policies because of you. I was reviewing integration protocols when my phone rang. A 919 area code. Raleigh. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Lauren. The voice was familiar but stripped of its usual arrogance. Eli.
Hello, Eli?
A pause. I could hear him breathing, choosing words carefully. I owe you an apology.
You don't owe me anything. No, I do. I was wrong. Not just about the proposal, about everything. The way I treated you. The way I dismissed your work. I let my ego. He trailed off. I'm sorry.
I stared at my screen, watching real-time user data flow through the system he'd called worthless. Apology noted. I know it doesn't change anything. I know I cost the company millions, cost myself everything, but I needed you to know that I understand now. What you built, what you saw, it was brilliant. I was too stupid and arrogant to see it.
The data was always there, I said quietly. You just had to look.
Another pause. For what it's worth, I told the board the truth, that you developed this independently, that we had no claim to it, that it was entirely my failure.
I appreciate that. Lauren, do you think, is there any chance you'd consider hiring?
No, the word came out firm but not unkind. Eli, you're talented in your own way, but NeuroBlink requires a different kind of thinking. The kind that recognizes innovation wherever it comes from, not just from people who look like what we expect innovators to look like.
He sighed. I understand. Good luck, Lauren, genuinely.
After he hung up, I sat quietly for a moment. His contrition was genuine. I could tell from the voice patterns another thing the algorithm could analyze if I cared to run it. But apologies didn't rebuild burned bridges or resurrect dismissed opportunities. My laptop pinged with a new message. Margaret Liu from Zentria, forwarding their press release draft. Zentria partners with NeuroBlink for revolutionary behavioral analytics platform. The 5-year $37 million agreement represents a new paradigm in understanding customer intelligence. At the bottom, she'd added a personal note. PR wants to know if you'd like to include a quote, something about innovation and vision. I thought for a moment, then typed. True innovation doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It often appears as a simple solution to a complex problem, easily overlooked by those expecting something flashier. At NeuroBlink, We believe the best ideas can come from anywhere. The key is recognizing them when they appear. Professional, pointed, perfect. As I hit send, my phone buzzed with another message from Sarah. Board just announced they're creating a new position, Chief Innovation Recognition Officer, someone whose entire job is making sure they don't miss the next you. The salary $100K, 10 times what your proposal cost. I smiled, closing my laptop. The algorithm had executed flawlessly, every variable falling into place as predicted. Nova Forge would recover. Eventually, they'd hire consultants, revamp processes, and probably become a case study in business schools about the cost of institutional blindness. But they'd never get back what they'd thrown away. Some opportunities, once rejected, transform into someone else's empire. $1,700, such a small number, such an expensive lesson. The data never lied, and neither did I. Monday's press conference streamed live from Zentria's Seattle headquarters. I stood between Robert Zhao and Margaret Liu, the three of us facing a room full of tech journalists and industry analysts. The deal was public now, $37 million. David conquering Goliath, the startup that beat Oracle and Nova Forge for one of the most coveted contracts in e-commerce. Ms. Pierce, a reporter called out. Nova Forge was notably absent from your background slides. You worked there for 12 years. Any comment on your former employer losing this contract to your 6-month-old startup? I'd prepared for this question, but as I stepped to the microphone, I caught movement in the back of the room. Marcus Webb, Nova Forge's CEO, standing against the wall. He'd flown to Seattle to watch this moment, to witness the full magnitude of what they'd lost. Every experience shapes us, I said carefully. My time at Nova Forge taught me valuable lessons about innovation, particularly about the importance of recognizing potential wherever it appears. I'm grateful for those lessons. Diplomatic, professional, the subtext clear to everyone who mattered. The behavioral analytics platform you've developed, another journalist pressed. Were any components of that created during your tenure at Nova Forge? NeuroBlink's technology was developed independently, I stated. In fact, when I proposed an early version of this concept at Nova Forge, it was formally rejected. That rejection, documented and witnessed, freed me to pursue the idea independently. Sometimes a no is just the universe redirecting you toward a bigger yes. Soft laughter rippled through the room, in the back. Marcus Webb's expression cycled through regret, resignation, and something that might have been respect. The questions continued for 30 minutes. How would NeuroBlink scale? What other industries could benefit? Was I hiring through it all? I maintained the same calm precision that had carried me through that humiliating meeting, through late nights building algorithms Nova Forge couldn't see, through negotiations that transformed mockery into millions. As the conference concluded, Robert Zhao leaned into his microphone. One final point. Zentria chose NeuroBlink not just for their technology, but for their vision. Lauren Pierce saw patterns in data that others missed. More importantly, when established players dismissed her insights, she didn't get bitter, she got building. That's the kind of partner we want. The room erupted in camera flashes, handshakes, business cards, interview requests. Through it all, I kept catching glimpses of Marcus Webb, still standing in the back, still watching. Finally, as the crowd thinned, he approached. No entourage, no lawyers, just a tired-looking CEO who'd learned an expensive lesson. Congratulations, Lauren. Thank you, Marcus. He studied the Zentria logo behind us, the NeuroBlink banner, the visible symbols of his company's failure. $1,700. Yes. I've been thinking about that number. Eli's coffee budget was $3,000 a month. His team's Friday happy hours cost us more than your entire proposal. I waited, letting him process what he needed to process. I wanted to tell you something, he continued. After you left, I had it pull your performance reviews. 12 years of exceeding expectations, 43 documented innovations that saved or earned us millions, and we pushed you out over $1,700. You didn't push me out,
I corrected. You freed me. He almost smiled. That's gracious of you. It's accurate. If you'd funded my proposal, Neuroblink would be a Nova Forge product. You'd have made money, but I'd have remained what Eli called me, a PowerPoint teacher with delusions. Instead, I own a company valued at $50 million and growing. What would you have done differently, he asked, if you were in my position? I thought about it. Listen, not just to the loud voices, or the confident pitches, or the people who look like what we expect leaders to look like. Listen to the quiet innovations, the careful analyses, the people who let their work speak because they're too busy creating to play politics. He nodded slowly. We've instituted new policies. I heard, Chief Innovation Recognition Officer. It's a start. Would you ever consider... No. Gentle but final. Marcus, we both know I could never come back, not because of anger or resentment, but because I've outgrown what Nova Forge could offer me. You gave me a gift when you let Eli dismiss me. You forced me to bet on myself. Turns out, I was an excellent investment. He extended his hand. I shook it, a closure 12 years in the making. As he walked away, Margaret Liu appeared at my elbow. Former boss. Former limitation. She smiled. Speaking of limitations, we need to discuss Phase 2. Robert's already fielding calls from 3 other Fortune 500s who want what we're building. You ready to scale? I looked around the conference room, at the cameras and contracts, and future we'd built from $1,700 worth of dismissed dreams. In 6 months, I'd gone from corporate exile to CEO of one of the most promising startups in tech. But this was just the beginning. I'm ready. That night, back in my Austin apartment, I finally opened the champagne Patricia Yang had sent, Dom Perignon, with a note. To seeing patterns others miss, and to having the courage to follow them. I poured a glass and opened my laptop. The integration with Zentria was proceeding smoothly. My team was executing flawlessly. The algorithm was learning, improving, proving its worth with every passing hour. On my desk sat a framed printout, Eli's email rejecting my proposal, the one where he'd called it small thinking from someone better suited to documentation. I'd kept it as fuel during the dark days. Now it was just a reminder the biggest revenge isn't making them pay. It's making them watch you succeed with the very thing they said was worthless. My phone buzzed, a LinkedIn notification. Eli had updated his status. Taking time to reflect and learn, humbled by recent experiences. To anyone whose potential I failed to recognize, I see you now. I closed the laptop. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new growth, new proof that innovation doesn't always arrive in expected packages. But tonight, I'd simply savor the truth the data had always shown. They laughed at my $1,700 proposal, so I sold it for $37 million instead. The algorithm was elegant, the revenge was perfect, and this was only the beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If this tale of corporate revenge and sweet vindication resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever had your ideas dismissed, only to prove everyone wrong later? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments.